The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming to you on November 14th, 2022, just about a week after the midterms. Boy, I tell you, it always seems depressing for libertarians after these things. But, we have an escape for you this time. We're going to be talking about free speech issues, and we have a special guest today from FIRE, Zach Greenberg. And FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So he'll help us discuss some of these free speech issues. So before we jump into them, let me introduce you to the panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. No Screaming Eagle this week, but hopefully he'll be back next week. And in our upper right-hand corner, we have Zach Greenberg, our guest today from FIRE. He is the Senior Program Officer, student organizations, and campus rights advocacy for FIRE. So let's jump into some of these topics. We've got them from far and wide today. And our first stop in talking about free speech is Iran. So, boy, they've got some interesting stuff going on there. So, this almost really shows, how terrible things can get if we don't really watch our rights and pay attention to them here in this country, because boy, I tell you, they're talking about hijabs, which are kind of like a form of mask, and all of the just horrific things that can come when people try and force some of these things on other people. And there they had a woman who was her name was Masha Amini, and she was apparently a 22-year-old woman who was visiting, I guess, she was a Kurdish woman, and yes. The police arrested her, and I guess she wasn't wearing her. Let's see, it's a
hijab. It's something that she must cover her hair. All women must cover their hair in these Islamic countries.
Yeah, it's a face covering, and she wasn't.
No, it's
wearing
not face covering. No, Jason.
Oh, okay. It's just the head covering then. Just
head
the
cover.
Scarf.
Yeah.
Okay. So just the headscarf. Okay. So in this case, she was not wearing it in conforming with the standards that the police there wanted, and they beat her while she was in custody after they arrested her, and she wound up dying, and that led to massive protests in the country. And then it led for a call from the parliament to essentially give the death penalty to protesters there. So it's just absolutely insane. And I mean, my gosh, some of the rhetoric I remember hearing when we were talking about COVID, and how some people were just fine, maybe if you weren't going to conform, you lose your job, maybe we're not even going to treat you in a hospital, or, we give you, I can remember there were cases of people waiting for an organ transplant, and they were literally not willing. They were going to say, oh, no, sorry, you're not going to get it because you're not willing to take our vaccine or something else like that. So, but anyways, this is just really crazy. I mean, they've had thousands and thousands of people protesting. It's caused a lot of disruption, and you can see in this picture here, the road is just all clogged up. Looks like there might be a car on fire there, but essentially, pretty serious rioting, going on there. So, what do you guys think about this? It just really seems like where things can spiral to if we're not careful about our rights.
Well, Zach, why don't you go ahead? You're a guest on our show, so why don't you go ahead?
Sure thing. Well, obviously, I don't really know anything about hair scarves or hair in general, but I do know a little bit about free speech and how that impacts people's ability to wear expressive clothing. Right? Speech is not just expression is the word you say. Expression is the clothes you wear, the people you hang out with, the God we worship or not worship. And in Iran, many of these countries having an official religion of the nation and the laws of that religion being, tenets of religion being imposed upon people, you can see how repressive that may be. And the funny part is, in Iran's constitution and their policies, they do promise free speech, but it's a very different form of free speech than we're accustomed to in America, where we have a toleration of different viewpoints and ideas. And I think this situation in Iran shows how if you're going to go down this road of oppression and censorship, you're going to have to do a lot of it. Because with the internet nowadays and with people out there protesting, expressing themselves, it's just really difficult to enforce a conformity and orthodoxy in a nation of I believe it's millions, tens of millions of people.
It's so very easy to say, well, of course, we are here in the United States in our constitutional republic, and something like this could never happen here in the United States. We so far away from the death penalty for people who are expressing themselves in whatever form they choose to. We are so far from that, things like that can never happen here. But when you think about this thing about cancel culture that is ongoing right now in our society, how far away are we really? In Canada, just during the COVID protests and all that, look at what was happening in Canada. Just to our north, one of the beacons of free speech in North America, and look at what they were trying to do to those truckers. The government of Canada was trying to shut down truckers in every possible way they could think about, just because they disagreed with the narrative out there. Here in the United States, we have this cancel culture where people are losing their livelihood because of something they said. There are people who are losing jobs and associations because of something that was said. So it may sound extreme that we are not at the level of what's going on in Iran right now, but how far away are we really if we don't protect free speech, if we don't protect that First Amendment, if we don't keep on having an organization like yours, Zach, really and truly fighting to make sure that the tenets of that First Amendment, that thing that give us the right of free speech and free expression, if we don't have organizations like yours out there fighting for those things, what will happen to us? If not, end up in that dark alley to where Iran is right now.
Yeah, you're right. It's a slippery slope. We get a lot of case universities of administrators telling students they can't wear their letters, the fraternity letters, sorority letters on campus. I mean, this may seem like a benign restriction to you, but look what's happening in Iran right now. You have to wear, you can't wear religious clothing. That's how it starts. People telling the people what they should wear, what they should believe, and punishing them for not conforming.
Well, yeah. and beyond just that too. I mean, think about it. When you don't step up for those principles, when issues first come up, think about COVID, right? I mean, when we first heard 2 weeks to stop the spread, that was essentially lockdowns, right? And they were telling people that you were going to lose the right to go to work, to do, to run your business, whatever it was, and almost nobody stood up for those principles at that point. Everybody was going, "Oh, sure, okay, well, I'll be safe." I mean, there seems to be some, some kind of scare or other, I guess, communal drive to do something, and we just toss out those individual liberties so easily. It seems like.
But you see, what is happening is that government officials or maybe administrators on campuses, they inject this fear into society. They inject this thing. Oh, goodness, COVID is going to kill us. So we have to give up our rights. Oh, my God, somebody will be offended. So we have to give up our rights. Oh, my God, if we don't do this, some disaster is going to befall us. Maybe, like climate change. Oh, my God, we got to do something. And every time we have to do something, that something is giving up our rights of speech and expression. And that is the problem, is this injection of fear into society. And that's what's going on in Iran right now, is that they are terrified at the prospect of people being able to freely express themselves, whether it's not to wear the hijab or not to criticize some aspect of an Islamic society. They are terrified of it, because what will happen? They'll lose control. So every time you see these things of where people are telling us, oh, we have to give up our rights, every single time it involves violations of the First Amendment. Every single time. Violation of a universal concept, while it should be universal, the universal concept of us being able to freely express ourselves. And in Iran, and soon to be probably in the United States, unless we stop this, this is where we're going to end up, in this dark place where there's some governmental authority telling us what to think, what to say, and what to believe.
Well, it's kind of funny too, Zach, because when you mentioned the not being an issue or an expert on hair, I was thinking about the Taliban. When they came into power, they literally said all men have to have a beard that is a certain length long. It had to be, I think it was a 6-inch beard or something like that, and it couldn't be longer, couldn't be shorter. It had to be exactly a certain length. So it is absolutely goes to crazy levels. It seems like, at least with respect to individual liberty. These just seem like absolute, I guess things could just go to unimaginable places if we're not careful.
Absolutely. Yeah. The old memes, like hairstyling from the Taliban. Here's your beard. Hair. That was very popular online when that came out. I'm glad to be in Philadelphia and not in Toronto now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of unimaginable places, we're going to take you a little bit close to home for me and Leon, and that is here in California. Our authoritarian government has decided that if you're a doctor, you can't practice unless your views are in line with that of the state on things. And so recently they passed a bill that said that a doctor, if he tells his patients something other than what has been approved on COVID dogma, that essentially they're going to pull their license. So it just seems absolutely insane. I mean, I thought that a person's medical freedom was supposed to be between them and their doctor, not between whatever the state tells their doctor that they're supposed to do. What do you guys think about this? I mean, this seems absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, these misinformation, disinformation bans are one of the most serious threats to free speech we're facing. The government doesn't have a monopoly on truth here. Allowing individuals, especially professionals like doctors, to come to their own medical consensus is the most important thing we have for the advancement of our society. And the notion that the government has a role to play between the patient and the doctor is really an invasion of liberty, an invasion of free speech. And we need to see how this plays out. We need to understand, the text of the statute and, what it actually affects and restricts. But just the overall notion that doctors can be punished for unprofessional conduct akin to, botching a surgery or prescribing, wrong advice because they give their patients choices is egregious.
Yeah.
This whole thing about COVID and the and all the issues surrounding this thing about censoring doctors. This thing started during the pandemic. I don't know if you guys remember. There were several doctors. Here in California, Jason, I think you remember this. There were several doctors who, I don't know if their license was actually pulled, but they certainly were threatened with losing their license if they were prescribing hydroxychloroquine to any of their patients. I mean, this is a potentially a real problem where when we're talking about quote unquote reproductive rights, one of the big things they always talk about is that this have to be an issue between the doctor and the patient and all that kind of stuff and things like that. But when we're talking about COVID, now they're telling us it's not between the doctor and the patient, it's between the doctor and the patient and the government. And this is a real problem because look at what was happening at the federal level. If you guys remember, Biden and company was trying to form this disinformation governance board.
Yeah.
Imagine that the government, the federal government in the United States, which is the biggest emitter of disinformation and misinformation, is now trying to tell us what we should believe. If you just think about the absurdity of that. But this is the path we are heading on. You see, first they were trying to do this disinformation board or whatever the hell they were going to call it. Now we have Gavin Newsom and company trying to do this. Oh, we're going to pass this law and then we're going to punish doctors if they don't conform to the narrative as prescribed by the government. I guess they're saying it's a medical board, one of the medical boards or whatever. But all of this is this dark path that we're heading down, where free speech don't mean as much. And we have to stop these things. And this is where organizations like Zach's organization have to be with us fighting against these people. We really have to fight this. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a dark place.
We're fighting the good fight. It's funny with the pandemic. There's a report, and one thing I like to talk about in China, 2019 November, where a scientist was saying there's a newfound disease going around affecting people and killing them in Wuhan. And that guy, the first guy who was like, this is an issue here, was jailed and punished, and you haven't heard from him in a couple of years. They probably got to his family. So this whole thing started really with censorship, with repression, going back years, and it's continuing to this day, using COVID and coronavirus as an excuse to, make sure people conform and say the right things.
Well, not only that, we can't even get straight stories about if American funding was used in these laboratories and everything else. So, I mean, there's just all this suppression of information that should be public information. So it's just bonkers one way or another. But the other thing that's a little bit crazy here too is that when we're talking about doctors, I mean, this really is sort of an extension of science here that we're talking about, and what science is about is people questioning, and exactly. So maybe your doctor sees something that's a little bit different with you, because we're all different. We're not all the exact same individual, and so we may all have slightly different needs. And the idea that some government body is going to have one size fits all solution for everybody, it just seems counter science anyways. So.
Yeah,
and there's a presumption in here that the governments have some sort of monopoly on truth or on science, for that matter.
Yeah. So absolutely bonkers. I did have one other question for you, Zach. Is this something that will potentially could go to the Supreme Court or something like that as a constitutional issue, this case in California, or is this something that is probably just going to have to be something that's worked out within the state?
It's a good question, because it's a tricky constitutional legal issue, because the government has some role in establishing medical standards, right? Doctors get their licenses from these licensing authorities. And, if doctors are out there prescribing people to drink bleach, obviously that's an issue, right? You can kind of come down on that and suppress their speech, their advice that way. So it's more of an issue of shared governance of how egregious the restriction is and how tailored it is towards medical necessity. And so this is a situation where you really got to just kind of look at the statute, devils in the details, figure out what's being restricted here. And it could be challenged. I'm sure doctors, like lawyers, are very litigious. They'll lawyer up and get this, at least in some court in California. And I'd be curious to see how the judge rules.
Okay. Well, I guess, now it's probably a good time to shift to a more local level. So we've been to sort of the international level, then we've stopped at the state level here in California. And now we're jumping over to Michigan, where they had a mayor in a town of Eastpointe. Maybe we could get the visual up on this one, James. She literally, it's a city council meeting where it's open to the public to give comment, and the public shows up. And the mayor, that's this woman right here, she literally would not allow anybody to speak as people tried to speak. She just drowned them out, saying, I'm not going to allow you to slander me or criticize me. And so they didn't literally even get their chance to speak, which is insane. And you guys are involved in this, I understand as well, Zach. Could you tell us a little more about the story?
First of all, you got to love, small town America, or like people go into a public comment period and just like telling their officials what's what. It's like the purest form of democracy and free speech, right? You just go up there and you say, hey, this is what I believe in. You have to listen to me because this is a public forum. First Amendment, you're my elected official. That's part of what makes the American experience great. However, in this case, you have this mayor who's being criticized by her constituents, and she's essentially saying, no, you can't speak. We will not have speech about this issue. My mayoral tenure here about this issue in this public forum. And that is an egregious, clear violation of citizens' right to confront their governments. It's why the colonists broke away from King George, right? It goes back a long time, holding our elected officials accountable, just being able to bring our grievances to them. And it's clear viewpoint discrimination, and Fires actually filed a lawsuit against the mayor and the government there to vindicate the citizens' right to speak, and to send a message to really all local governments across the nation that they have to, if they're going to be a leader in America, if you're going to be an elected official, a government official, you have to allow people, your constituents, the right to confront you and speak to you and talk about any issue they want.
It's got really kind of funny. You see this authoritarian tendency in some of our government officials. This woman in particular. I mean, she's not alone. Even though it's really horrible what we're seeing here, but she's not alone in the attempt by government officials to attempt to limit speech. We have seen this all over the place. Even that disinformation board that we were talking about here a little while ago, that really was an attempt to limit speech. That really what it was. They didn't want certain kind of speech to be in the public square. And they will come up with this board, and we're going to say, well, what is disinformation, what is misinformation, and all that kind of nonsense. But this trend, this woman just represents a trend of the authoritarian tendencies of government officials to tell us that we can't speak in certain places. If you look at what was happening in Loudoun County in Virginia, when they were having a lot of debates about the activities of the school board, the school board. That was a school board case, yeah. But those are elected officials, and even there, they were trying to limit speech. They didn't want certain people to say certain things and all that kind of stuff and things like that. Actually, one father whose daughter was raped in one of these schools, he was arrested. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, they said, oh, he got a little bit rowdy and blah, 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 and that kind of stuff and things like that. But who the hell wouldn't get rowdy if your daughter has been sexually assaulted? Who the hell would not? Okay?
Right. Well, and it turned out that what he was getting upset about, the father, was that the school board was literally lying about what had the events that had transpired about his daughter to the whole group, to the whole meeting there, and so he was upset about it, and so the police then tackled him and arrested him, and it was just terrible.
They were trying to cover it up, right? They're trying to cover it up. So but their whole idea, the whole thing about these things and some of these school board meetings and now this city council and stuff like that is this trend by elected officials to limit speech that they don't like. And that's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, now that we've talked a little bit about local government as well, let's jump to the college campus, because that's sort of the bread and butter of FIRE. And boy, we've seen a lot of videos of people protesting and trying to shut down speech and in some case classes at colleges. Well, this is kind of an interesting one because, and this one is a recent article up on FIRE's website, so you can go find that. They published that on November 10th. But this is essentially a class on that were a seminar that was teaching about the problems of whiteness, which seems like kind of a suspect course to begin with. But the point was that there were a bunch of death threats that came in to against the professor in order to get them to cancel the class. And so they didn't wind up canceling it. They wound up kicking it to the next semester, I guess. Yeah. And so they're going to rerun the class then. But it does bring up kind of a whole bunch of, sort of weird issues. I mean, one is, maybe is there an issue with a class that's being taught that sort of seems to discriminate potentially against one group of people that is, it seems like it's a public university. I think this is a University of Chicago here, but
no, I think the university is a private school, isn't it? Is the university a private school? I think it is, isn't it? Is it?
Okay.
The private school, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a private school, but still they're taking some, public funding and all that. But still, even then, if that's the problem, should we still have, issues of people, throwing death threats at people in order to get them to shut up? And then to top it off, it does bring up one other question. In this crazy time that we're in, when I guess, it doesn't matter what you do. It sounds like you can get some death threats out there. Then I guess, are they reacting too severely to this as well? Wondering, that they even need to cancel the class. So I don't know. It seems like there's a bunch of issues going on here. But certainly, as a libertarian, I definitely hate the idea that somebody is having to be quiet because somebody's threatening to kill them. What do you guys think about this?
Bit of an overreaction, right? Death threats for a college class. I mean, these are massive institutions. They have, tens of thousands of different classes, everything from, Vikings and trebuchets to the problems of different races. It's a massive establishment here, and we're talking about one class problem of whiteness, which does have a pedagogical and sociological basis, right? That essentially goes into the history of in America, like colonialism and like slavery, stuff like that. And it's provocative, probably perhaps intentionally so, but still, universities and professors have the right to teach provocative classes, and students have the right to take it. And it's obviously a popular class, want to learn about it, and maybe students disagree about whiteness and whether it's a problem, but at least they come away learning something. And the issue here is that you have these outside actors trying to get a university to cancel a class because the outside actors don't like the class. And this isn't about them. It's about the students and the professors being able to teach and learn at a university that promises free speech. And it's really egregious when universities cave into these demands by canceling the class or rescheduling it. And so we understand that the class was rescheduled, students still able to take the class, but still, universities should not cave. They should not give in to these demands and these threats to move their curriculum and to control what they teach.
I'm really torn by this thing. First of all, what stands out first to me is the hypocrisy in all of this. Okay, to start with, the problem of whiteness. Which university in America will have a class on the problem of blackness?
True.
Okay, that's the first thing. Which university is going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
But even though philosophically I understand your point, Zach, I really do, and I think free speech should be for all, even for offensive speech, even things that I may personally find offensive. I think the right to free speech should always be protected. Seriously, except for those cases where the Supreme Court have deemed that speech is not protected. I think in all cases other than those, free speech should be protected, even in this very offensive case that we're talking about. I mean, yes. I mean, seriously. I mean, come on, problem of whiteness. Come on, for crying out loud.
Maybe it's just a labeling problem.
Call it Sociology 101, right? Don't call it problem of whiteness. Call it something else.
The funny thing is, with most of these classes, if they didn't, if they just had a sleeper of a title, nobody would ever even, get upset about it.
No, right? And I am sure there are many campuses and courses throughout America where they're going to probably be teaching the very same material in the class. Yeah. But with a different name, right?
Right. Yeah. Yes. The title is important, or is it the material? That's a really good point.
Yeah. Well, and that is funny too, because we've heard about these issues with the label CRT and whether or not they're actually teaching it. The point is that there's concepts that are sort of leaking in from that, where they're even talking about in places like California that math can be racist, and I mean it's just like it's the most objective of categories. And the funny thing was, I remember when they were canceling the using the SATs in the UC system because of some of these issues where they were saying, oh well, these things are we don't like the way that they're metricing different racial groups. The funny thing is that the foreign students who were coming in were smashing these tests on the math, which means this has nothing to do with race on the math, because I mean they would be the most disadvantaged group of all if there's some cultural bias.
You would think so, right? You would think so.
Yeah. So it's but well, yeah. I don't know if you guys are ready to move on from this one, or you have any more on it.
No, it's just that at the bottom line, truly, I would like free speech to be protected in all cases. I mean, I'm sure Zach is familiar with the very famous case from the 1960s that before the ACLU became woke, they were defending that march by the Nazis in Stokey, Illinois.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure you're familiar with that case. And I personally find the Nazis very offensive, but I think the ACLU was absolutely right to defend their right to free expression. I really believe that. But nowadays in our snowflake society, but the snowflakes are becoming, to me, quite prominent, at least in the news, and stuff like that, where offensive speech, quote unquote offensive speech. Now they are trying to shut down the speech that they think is offensive. No, we can't allow that. We really can't. We cannot. If we do, we're going to lose ourselves. We're going to lose our constitutional republic.
100%.
Well, shifting now to the last topic, our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, where we try and find something a little bit silly or crazy that some politician or media personality has said recently. This is sort of tied to the education thing almost, because Joy Reid recently on MSNBC's one of their hosts on November 3rd, she said that essentially that people just don't use the word inflation in normal conversation, which it's kind of a strange thing, and maybe in some ways, but there might be some truth considering how badly our policy leaders do on economics and the inflation we're currently seeing. But it's just crazy the level of, I guess. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the word. It's almost pandering or whatever to think that people are so uninformed that they don't even know what this word is. And what she actually said was, the only people I ever hear use the word inflation are journalists and economists. So that is not part of the normal lexicon of the way people talk. So it is interesting that Republicans are doing something that they don't normally do, right? Which is to use the common tongue, not just common English, to sort of use their campaigns like they do with crime. But that they've done is they've taught people the word inflation. Most people would have never used that word ever in their lives, are using it now because they've been taught it. So I don't know what we would call it if we didn't call it inflation.
Inflation, yeah.
We just say,
when I become president and when I stop being a free speech absolutist, I'm gonna shut down Joy Reid's free speech rights. Honestly, I am. That woman is so joyless. I don't know why her name is Joy Reid. It should be Joyless Reid. This woman is a moron. I mean, oh God, please help us with this stupidity. And I wouldn't shut down her free speech because I disagree with her speech. I'll shut down her free speech for her stupidity. I really would. Seriously. All right, YouTube, I'm joking, okay?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on inflation, Zach?
There's a lot to say about this case, but I'll just say this, that there's a lot of attempts by the left and a little bit by the right also, mostly in Trump's era, to like redefine what words mean.
Yes.
Like inflation's a word, that's a specific meaning in economics terms, right? But people don't say that word, say this word, don't use that language, use this language. It's pretty it's a very subtle form of manipulation and control, right? Say, we're not going to use these certain words anymore. So I'm always skeptical of those attempts, especially by authority figures, like the presidents and by people, leaders in their field about these issues. So I'm very skeptical, and inflation's inflation. It's happening. Everyone knows it's happening. Economic illiteracy is also rampant. So I think teaching people what these words mean and what's happening is always a good thing.
Well, and it's quite Orwellian. I was going to say too.
Orwellian, yeah, it's a good word
because,
for it.
Yeah, I mean, redefining these words on the fly, and we saw them do that with recession as well. We had entered the technical definition of a recession, and then they said, "Well, it doesn't feel like a recession, so we're not really in a recession, but maybe later we'll be in."
Yeah, I'm like, is it or it's not? Like how dumb do you think we are? Like everyone's paying more gas, right? It's like pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, Zach, I know I'm not trying to make it political here, okay?
No, it's cool.
But this is a problem that we've seen with the left quite a lot, is the redefinition of words. I mean, frankly, I was joking about Joy a little while ago. I mean, if Joy Reid have her own program and she wants to talk this nonsense, she is free to do so. But this is a problem that we have on the left. Look at this thing they call diversity, inclusion, and equity, which is, if you look at the acronym, it's really DIE. But if you look at that thing, who's going to be against diversity? Who's going to be against inclusion? Who's going to be against equity? But when you dig down into the weeds of that thing, you see what they are talking about, and it's nothing but a form. Well, it's a new Jim Crow rally. That's what it is, where they're segregating people, and the ideas, the very thing that promotes and further our free speech rights. They want to limit that, having all of these. Everybody must be in the little box. Everybody must be in the little pigeonhole. And if you are black, you could only think and believe these things. And in some cases, you could only vote for these kind of people. If you're white, well, of course, the white people, well, they have a whole long racist history. So we have to be careful of what they say and what they do. And this is how it goes on. That they want to put everybody in these little pigeonholes where where interaction is not even part of our American experience. And all of that is in this critical race theory and this diversity, inclusion, and equity. But we are living in a time that is dangerous. And I know we are joking about Joy Reid, but we are living in a time that is dangerous, where free speech is under attack, just like the Second Amendment is under attack. And we have to stand up and we have to fix this before we go too far along this path.
And I think it keeps the public off balance a little bit if new words are constantly being introduced to characterize things that the public wasn't familiar with. Like equity is a sort of recent new addition, it seems like, to the lexicon, where everybody who used to talk about the word equality, now suddenly it seems to have shifted toward the word equity. Right. And it just seems to be like there's always constantly new words and terms. And even with the CRT thing, I mean, look at the debate that's going on. We can't even get to the meat of what the problem is in the classroom. Everybody's arguing over the definition of what the problem is in the classroom. So yeah, it's just crazy. But anyways, I guess we're just about at the end of our show. So Zach, did you have any last thoughts or any thing that you wanted to direct our listeners to with FIRE?
I just want to say thank you for having me. We're at thefire.org. We're always happy to hear from people. If you want to talk about free speech, have a free speech to yourself. And of course, if you're a student or professor on a college campus that's been censored, submit a case, let us know. We're here to help defending your rights.
Awesome. And James, could you throw up the website real quick just so people can see it? Awesome. And
That's
it's
perfect.
thefire.org. So check that out and you can find out more about them and be able to help out as well. So, okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Zach. And thanks to our listeners for listening to us. And if you want to see more of the interview with Zach, we had him on an earlier podcast. So go check that out as well. And otherwise, thanks so much for joining us and we'll see you at the next one. Until then, stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.